Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Today we're discussing the Netflix series Baby Reindeer, one of the worst advertised shows I've seen in some time, so please watch it if you can. So briefly, Baby Reindeer is an adaptation of Richard Gadd's acclaimed one-man play about his experience being stalked by a middle-aged woman. In the show, Richard renames himself Donny as well as everyone else involved in order to protect their identities. Richard came to fame with the one-man show Monkey See, Monkey Do, which he performed at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which is one of the biggest performing arts festivals in the world. It actually won the Comedy Award that year, and it is about his experience being assaulted by an older man very early on in his career. He followed this with another piece about a female stalker called Baby Reindeer, and the series is a mix of both stories. In terms of aesthetics, this feels like a horror/true crime documentary. There are so many uncomfortable close-ups, like unsettling angles, and I really appreciated the balance between comedy and horror. Like, you don't know whether to laugh, cry, get upset. Like, there are moments that literally had me like laughing out loud. So we meet Martha, and she claims to be a high-powered attorney, and it's so clear that she's not. She sends him messages from her laptop, but then types "sent from my iPhone." And it's all these small things that you're just like, why would somebody do that? The photoshopping on Facebook. So she claims to have all these high-powered connections. And so she would Photoshop her face next to all these prominent politicians. And this is before AI. And it's very clear she doesn't know how to use Photoshop, so it's so jarring. Like the whole series just will have you laughing, crying, laughing, crying, laughing, crying. The actress who plays Martha definitely deserves an Emmy, or at least a nomination at the very worst. She does a great job of balancing crazy with sympathetic. I also really enjoyed the supporting cast. I felt like they were very well written and did a lot to enhance the plot. I also really appreciated the pacing of the series. Right from the first episode, Donny finds out that Martha is a convicted stalker. It becomes clear to the audience that this will not just be a story about some crazy stalker. The show is told entirely from Donny's perspective. I felt his narration was incredibly raw and relatable. The way he narrates the show is very matter of fact, like here's what happened and here's how I reacted to it. As an audience, we know exactly what's going on with Donny, and there's so many moments where you want to step in and explain to his friends and family why he's behaving the way that he's behaving. When you go through something so traumatic, it can isolate you from your friends and family and the people who want to help you the most. But it's very hard to explain something to other people when you don't even know how to explain it to yourself. When you yourself are trying to process this information and other people around you are like, what's wrong? And you're like, I can't put it into words. Donny is reflecting on a very difficult time in his life, describing what took place, how he reacted to it, and possible reasons why. What touched me the most was the level of empathy that he had for Martha and the way that he was able to use her to analyze his life in general and what got him to this point. Watching Donny go through these roller coaster of emotions was just way too relatable, and I felt he did a great job putting feelings into words that are incredibly difficult to articulate. There's a difference between what we wish we would have done in a certain situation and what we actually end up doing in a certain situation. Like, how many times do we look back on something and just wonder, why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? Why did I react the way I did? This, that, and the other. And from the beginning, Donny knew that Martha had the potential to ruin his life, but he didn't think that she would actually end up doing it. She walks into his bar one day unable to afford a thing, and feeling very sorry for her, he offers her a cup of tea on the house, and this simple act of kindness triggers his unraveling. Even after finding out that she's not only a liar, but that she's incredibly dangerous, he never actually takes any precautions, and he even downplays the way that she forces himself into her life. Like, this woman infiltrates to the point where she's assaulting people in his life, and he's like, listen, I got it handled. And it's like, sir, you don't have it handled. call the police. He never excuses Martha's behavior or his own. Like, he never tries to say this is the reason why Martha is behaving the way that she's behaving. He never tries to pinpoint any exact moment in her life, because at the end of the day, we don't know what makes people the way that they are. It's impossible for him to say this is why Martha is the way that she is. All he can do is reflect on his own experience, what it triggered and why. That's the only certainty that he has. His narration really does feel like someone putting the pieces of a puzzle together. He starts with his first impressions of Martha, his reaction to her, the more violent she becomes, his reflection on his family, his friends, his girlfriends. Like, he's really kind of just going through all these moments in his life. And ultimately, this paints a picture not of Martha or even Donny really, but about this bigger picture in terms of how societal expectations of men and women can really make someone vulnerable to this type of predatory behavior. Like, it takes a lot for Donny to fight back. Throughout this series, we see his friends, his co-workers laughing at him, telling him to handle it, downplaying the severity of the situation. Like, as a man, you are not supposed to be threatened by a woman, let alone a middle-aged, out-of-shape woman. And it's not until he actually speaks up and continues to speak up that he gets any power. However, with that being said, getting help was incredibly difficult, because even after 6 months, when he does report her to the police, they look at him like a question mark. Like, is there nothing you could do to handle this? Like, you really gotta bother us with this? He has a really great line, like something about no one carries the weight of a knife. His point being that if someone got a gun to your head or a knife to your head, that pretty much evens the playing field. And I thought this series was almost like the male I May Destroy You. Like, it's a great commentary on masculinity and the correlation between masculinity and survival. Like, abuse is very much about control. Someone taking control of their own lives by ruining and trying to control other people's lives. And I felt the comedy aspect of the show really emphasized this point, because he has all these horrible things happen to him, and yet he's expected to go on as like business as usual, laugh it off. The show must go on. And he says towards the end of the series that the reason that he wanted to become a comedian is because it enables him to hide. He doesn't really have to present his true self to the world. Like, he would rather be known as the funny guy than who he actually is as a person. And in terms of masculinity, like, men are really expected to put on a face, a strong face, despite what's going on inside. And this is the ramifications of that. And Donny, in terms of his comedic aspect, like, I wouldn't call him a bad comedian. I would just say that he's performing in the wrong way. And I really liked how his career only started to take off when he started to take off this mask and let go of all these expectations. It started to really be honest about what was going on with him. The more honest he is with the people around him, the more relaxed he became. And it also enabled other people around them to drop their mask and speak out about their own trauma, these things that they've been bottling up deep inside. One of the most harrowing episodes in this entire series is when we find out that 5 years prior to meeting Martha, he was assaulted by an older man very early in his career. This part of the series is taken from Monkey See, Monkey Do, which he performed at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. In the series, he goes to the festival with very big hopes and dreams and just all this ambition. And to be a comedian, you really do have to be confident. And it's very sad, because what we know now of very famous comedians, they were just incredibly depressed. A lot of them were just like a well of insecurity. So many of them actually just ended up committing suicide. And to pursue this type of career, you really do have to be a dreamer, because the success rate is incredibly low. And the same things that would make you pursue this career could actually end up making you very vulnerable to predators, because you kind of have to go with the flow in some ways. And that's exactly what Donny was doing when he met Darren. One night he goes out to socialize at this bar, and he meets Darren, this very prominent writer. And Darren is the closest in proximity to success that Donny has had, and he wasn't willing to give it up that quickly. And the contrast between Darren and Martha is so well articulated in this series, because the show opens up with the policeman asking Donny, why did it take you so long to report this crime? And we find out midway through the series, Darren is the reason. It was very hard for him to justify reporting Martha without reporting Darren as well. Darren, in comparison to Martha, is a sociopathic groomer. He uses his power to take advantage of very young men. And the shame of having been violated by someone he trusted and confided in is not something that he was willing to admit to at all. Donny's narration of his feelings during this time was quite gut-wrenching. Darren and Donny spend a considerable amount of time together before Darren assaults him. And so poor Donny is under the impression that this man very much cares about him, wants him to be successful, sees his potential, and for a young comedian at this time, this meant the world. The validation that Darren was able to give Donny was incredibly intoxicating, because Darren really made it seem that fame was just around the corner. Like if he could just endure a little bit more, like he would get there. The progression to this final assault was terrifying, because we know that something bad is coming and there's nothing we can do to stop it. And the whole time we're watching, right, we want him to run away, we want him to attack him, we want him to report him, we want him to do anything, but none of these things actually take place. I thought the honesty in which Donny articulates his feelings during this time was so well done. There's a mix of emotions when something terrible happens to you. You blame yourself, you blame them, you blame the world, like you're just kind of in a state of total confusion. He describes wanting to disassociate from his body, and he allows stranger after stranger to take control of it in an attempt to understand how Darren was able to have such power over him and why he wasn't able to really do anything about it. This trauma that occurred with Darren totally derailed his life for a period of time. He was unable to be intimate with anybody. He was totally disconnected from his body. And I thought his relationship to Terri was a really, really great commentary on how trauma can not only isolate you from yourself, but from all the people around you. And watching him with Terri, like, we know why he's going through what he's going through. And so you do want to step in and speak for him, like, no, it's really not you, like it's deeper than that. And he just can't really put anything into words because he's still trying to process what happened to him. I thought Terri's assessment of Martha was so spot on, because she tells him the reason that you let this escalate the way that it has is because some part of you deep down inside is desperate for validation, desperate for attention. There's something in you that's enabling this to happen, and he's very reluctant to come to that conclusion until the very end. And the reason he was susceptible to Martha is the same reason he was susceptible to Darren. In a city like London, no one notices you. So when somebody actually sees you and just looks at you with admiration and respect, it's a euphoria. It becomes like you get this adrenaline rush. He loved the feeling that Martha gave him. She was always telling him how special he was, how talented, how handsome, how much potential, how funny he was. And because she was able to validate his feelings, he was able to see past her darkness. And it takes such extremes for the toll that Martha has had on his life to catch up to him. Like, she literally has to smash him over the face with a glass before he can actually stop rationalizing why he keeps giving Martha a pass. In real life, his stalker actually became enraged by the success of Monkey See, Monkey Do, to the point that she started harassing his family, harassing him, everybody around him a lot more aggressively, because the less accessible he became to her, the crazier she got. And going back to this validation, like throughout the series, we get these texts, these kind of barely coherent texts, and they are just so unhinged. But in every message, she reiterates that she loves him. You know, like, I hate you, I want to kill you, but I love you. I'm stalking you, but I love you. Like, she always adds that part in, and she lets him know that she believes that she loves him, and this is her way of showing love. Part of the comfort of having Martha around is that she could see that something was going on with him because he was so susceptible to her. So the more room he gave her, the more she was able to kind of creep into his life. And I think he was absolutely terrified that if people found out about what happened to him, or if he ever opened up, that people would reject him and they would not understand him. And actually, it's quite the opposite. it freed a lot of the people around him. And one of the most powerful episodes is when he tells his family, and he's absolutely petrified to tell his mother and father. Like, he is just sitting there, he's terrified. And to his surprise, his father actually opens up to him and says, hey, like, would you think of me as less of a man if I told you I went through the same thing growing up in the Catholic Church? And I think this was so powerful because it really speaks to, again, this idea of masculinity and this expectation to really just put on a brave face, even though it's just eating you away inside. And his ability to open up allowed everybody else around him to open up. I think that's the other point about trauma the series articulates so well. The way it's able to just imprison everybody around you, because chances are there's somebody going through the same thing, and by speaking about it, you could potentially free them as well. Martha, for better or worse, forced him out of his cocoon. I mean, it took such extremes, but he got there. Granted, there's really nothing to suggest in this series that Martha would have stopped on her own had she not been sentenced to prison. And that scene when she's going away, I mean, she is looking at him like still like, I love you, I'm gonna keep sending you messages. Like, she looked at him with such longing, and it wasn't even hate. You know, she really believed that they were in a relationship and that this man was for her. After she is sent away, he becomes obsessed with her. He starts listening to all these voice notes that he tried so desperately to ignore throughout their time together. As happy as he was that Martha was out of his life, he desperately did miss the validation and that feeling of confidence that she gave him. And towards the end of the series, he goes back to Darren's house. And I think the reason he goes back there is he was going through withdrawal. He needed a fix. He needed someone to tell him that everything was going to be all right, that he had talent, that he had potential. Like, he went there to fill the void of Martha, as weird as it sounds, because listening to her voice notes, like, he was a roller coaster of emotions, because when she was kind, she was really kind, and when she was crazy, she was bad, you know, crazy. And the final scene was absolutely perfect when he's at the bar and he's listening to Martha's voice note as to why she calls him baby reindeer, and the bartender asks for him to pay the tab, and he says, like, I don't have it. And the bartender looks annoyed, but he offered him the drink on the house. And in that moment, he understood exactly what Martha must have felt for him at that time, because he was really going through a rough patch, and the smallest act of kindness can really change your life, right? He felt it for a moment. You know, he looked like he was about to give it all up for that bartender. I mean, granted, he's not as, you know, off the wall as Martha, but for a moment, he could feel the relief she must have felt, the gratitude she must have felt for that simple act of kindness. Even if you are in your right mind, if you're going through something and you are at rock bottom, like, any small gesture can really just, like, really make a difference. Going back to the name of the show, Martha names him Baby Reindeer after this beloved toy that she used to have as a child. And this toy was very special to her. It followed her wherever she went. And she describes the features, you know, how this toy made her feel. And she projected onto Donny a lot of how she wishes she had been treated, I think, when she was a child. Again, the show is very smart in not distracting us with Martha's life, because again, we don't know why she is the way that she is. But the fact that she named him after this beloved toy that she had made a lot of sense, because in a lot of ways they were both looking for the same thing, which is this, like, unconditional love. Someone to love them no matter what they do. And I think that's why Donny was attracted to fame. Like, he loved the idea of people loving him regardless of who he actually was as a human being. And it's not until he finally stops people-pleasing and trying to figure out what other people want from him that he could actually step back and finally consider what he wants from himself, what would make him happy. And that's when his life starts to change. So I think this show is fantastic. This and I May Destroy You, like, would make a great, you know, double viewing. And this is the type of show that should be shown in schools and things like that, because it offers a great discussion. Highly recommend this. I think it's poorly advertised. Again, I clicked it by chance and I binged it. It's only half-hour episodes, so you'll get through it in one day. So you guys let me know what you're thinking. Until next time.